The street was still wet from a rain that smelled like money and old promises. Detective Lena Hart's phone buzzed against the vinyl seat, a text, 12th and Marlow, do not come alone. She looked at the dark alley between the deli and the pawn shop and thought of the man who'd vanished from that corner 2 months ago. City councilor's son, big debts, bigger secrets. Before she could decide, a shadow stepped out, a woman in a crimson coat with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're late," she said. Lena took a step toward the alley and felt the weight of every choice she'd ever made settle on her shoulders. Tonight would pull loose the thread tying a mayor, a crime boss, and a lie Lena had sworn to forget. If she followed it, there'd be no going back. The rain quit without warning, as if it had remembered a responsibility elsewhere. Lena Hart stood under the flickering marquee of the Marlow Theater, collar up, breath fogging in the cold air. The city had a way of folding its crimes into the smallest details: an abandoned stroller, a single glove on a stoop, the way a man's shoes were always a little too polished. Tonight, it folded itself into the shadowed mouth of an alley between Antonio's Deli and Herman's Pawn. She'd been a detective long enough to know the difference between a call and a warning. This had started as a missing person. Theo Vance, 30, 2, son of Councilman Richard Vance, last seen stumbling from the club at 2:13 a.m., leaving a trail of cigarette butts and a half-full martini. Now emails had leaked anonymized photos, financial records, a grainy video of Theo at a poker table with men whose faces Lena recognized from more than a decade on the force. Then the text came to her personal phone, 12th and Marlow. Do not come alone. She'd come anyway. The alley smelled of copper and stale coffee. A single globe light hummed overhead, casting everything in the yellow of someone else's nostalgia. Lena's boots crunched on glass as she moved forward. Her hand hovered over the grip of the gun at her hip, reflex more than suspicion. There were certain parts of the city where the law still felt like something borrowed, and Marlow was one of them. A crimson coat emerged from the darkness, the woman beneath it like a dagger in silk. Her hair was cut close, sharp as a whisper. She had the kind of face people remembered because it didn't make them comfortable, too evenly proportioned to be pretty, too steady to be pretty terrified. "You're late," she said. Lena's mouth found the same crooked halves, mile she'd used at interrogations for years. "Traffic," she answered. "And who are you, then?" "The person who doesn't want me to come alone. Call me June." The woman's voice didn't match the coat. It was softer, practiced. "You're not a city cop, are you? I heard you quit, then came back." Lena's jaw tightened. "I'm still a detective, if that's what you mean. State jurisdiction now." She kept her gaze level. "You said don't come alone. Where's everyone else, June?" June's mouth twitched. "You always were literal, Lena." She stepped closer, close enough Lena could see a faint scar along her jaw. "You earned yourself enemies by being careful. I need someone who's not married to them. Then talk." June glanced at the alley mouth, then at the theater marquee. Theo Vance didn't just disappear. He was taken, or he went somewhere someone would never expect. The people behind him are not petty thieves. They're building something that will let them own contracts and votes. They need a face, a fixer. Theo is that face. They had recordings. They had dealings, and now someone wants him quiet. Lena let the words settle. The name Vance had a way of moving like a current through the precinct. Families like his didn't like turbulence, but Lena had seen the other side of that river. She knew what politicians used and what they threw away. "Why tell me?" she asked. June's voice dimmed. "Because I worked for them once. I left when they started killing to cover bookkeeping errors. I can't go to internal affairs. They're in on it. I needed someone who could stand outside the system." Behind June, a shadow detached itself from a doorway, a tall man with the comfortable look of a man who owned 2 suits but never used either one for sleeping. He held something in his hand, a small, folded envelope. He handed it to June without looking, eyes on Lena as if weighing the logic of her. June unfolded the paper. Inside was a single photograph, Theo Vance, smiling in a way Lena had seen before in campaign trail photos. But in this picture, he sat at a poker table with an envelope of cash and a list of names written on the back. Lena flipped it over. 5 names, a contractor, a judge, a councilman's aide, a shell company, and bottom of the list heart. Lena, her skin thinned. "That's not mine," she said, voice even but shaking like wire. She had never, not once, been used in anything like that. June's eyes never left her face. It's a threat or a promise, depends how you look at it. She tucked the photograph back into the envelope and dropped it into Lena's palm with the softness of a goodbye. "They want you to chase Theo, or they want you to stop. Either way, you'll be the one bleeding." Lena realized the alley wasn't the only thing that smelled like old promises. June did. The city did. And for reasons she could not name, perhaps vanity, perhaps the dogged, stupid muscle memory of somebody who preferred not to leave things half. Unraveled, Lena slipped the envelope into her coat and met June's gaze. "All right," she said, "tell me everything." June smiled then, small and precise. "We don't have much time." By morning, Lena had convinced herself of a dozen reasons to hand the envelope to Internal Affairs and walk away. The list on its back, featuring her name, was the kind of thing that could end careers or end lives depending on how it was framed. She poured coffee from a thermos and read June's handwriting again. Start with Marlow. Follow the contractors, beware the mayor's foundation. The mayor, Henry Corbin, had been in office for 6 years. A polished man with a laugh that made donors part with more money than they could afford. His foundation had been the city's civic conscience on paper, funneling investments into playgrounds and summer jobs, while quietly underwriting projects that exploded more through zoning deals than community uplift. Lena's first stop was the poker room pictured in the photograph, the Filament, a strip on the wrong side of town that claimed to be a private club. The bouncer recognized her, which surprised her until she remembered him from an old bus. He let her in with a sigh, as if doing a favor to a past mistake. Inside smelled like whiskey and cotton candy, an odd combination, but the Filament cultivated contradictions. The poker circle was a ring of men and a few women who treated cards like confessions wrapped in velvet. A dealer with a tattoo that crawled up his forearm slid a deck with hands that had learned how to fold when asked to do the right thing. Lena didn't ask permission. She walked to the table and placed June's photograph face up. Conversations sloughed away like wallpaper being peeled. Men shifted, fingers tightening on chips. Theo Vance's grin in the photo had a dishonest quality that made Lena think of campaign posters and late-night apologies. The man across the table, a contractor named Marcus Hale, all elbows and expensive cologne, took a sip of his drink, watched her, then laughed. Detective Hart, he said, as if they'd met at a fundraiser and were discussing the weather. "What brings you to the Filament?" "Theo Vance." Lena said, "You know him." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Everyone knows him. City blood. Nice kid. Spends his daddy's money on other people's men." "Why?" Lena didn't present the photograph. She watched his eyes when she said, "He's missing." Something flickered, an expression Marcus thought he could hide that he could not. He had a temper, Marcus admitted finally. He got in over his head with men who make other men look like amateurs. "You don't want to go poking around there, detective." "Who are these men?" Lena demanded. Marcus shrugged. "You know who they are. You've worked your cases. Maybe you don't want to know anymore." Then he said something that stuck in Lena's head like a fishhook. If Theo had to disappear, it wasn't because of money. It was because of something he knew. Something that could change people's lives. She left the Filament with more questions than answers. Marcus's name took her to a string of permits and contracts awarded by the city, sudden, precise, and always in the shadow of a meeting at the mayor's office or the foundation's gala. The contractor's company, Hale Infrastructure, had been landing municipal projects with alarming frequency. The invoices were clean on their face until Lena started to pull at the threads. Shell companies, front accounts, transfers to places that dissolved when anyone tried to find them. June's warning about the contractors was an understatement. They weren't just builders, they were the backbone of a pipeline, public money rerouted, votes secured, reputations purchased, and Theo had been the person who could connect donors to deals, a middleman with campaign hours and after hours that mapped a city's favors. Lena spent the day mapping those transfers onto a city map until her kitchen table looked like a conspiracy theorist's altar. Marked in blue were the contracts, red were the shell companies, yellow the names that kept repeating like a prayer: Vance, Corbin, Hale, Thornton. Thornton was the judge who had been especially lenient in zoning disputes. Corbin's foundation had been a recipient of Hale's donations, then weeks later recommended for expedited permits. The pattern was ugly and precise. She called June after dark. The woman picked up on the third ring. "You found something?" June said, "No question, no pretense. You told me to follow contractors." Lena said, "They're not small. Time. They've bent permits and people." June sighed. "They don't like public attention. If Theo had paperwork showing direct transfers to the foundation and recordings of conversations, well, then he was a liability." "Who made the list?" Lena asked. "Who wrote my name on the back of that photograph?" June's silence lasted long enough that Lena began to imagine the worst. "Not them, Lena." June said finally, "Theo wrote it. He had a habit of making contingency notes. He kept his enemies close and his list closer. He wrote your name because he thought you were the one person who would follow it to the end, even if it cost you everything." The implication landed like ice. Theo Vance had trusted Lena enough to write her name on a list that could burn her. Why? Because she had a reputation for not being bought, for being quick, inconveniently moral, for being less willing to forget. "It could be a setup," Elena said. "It could be," June answered. But setups have a habit of revealing who is willing to cut corners when the light gets hot. Either you trace Theo and you find him, or you follow the money and you find the men who'd bury him. Either way, you're already in the picture. Lena squared her shoulders. The photograph had done what it was supposed to, pulled her into a calculus where the variables were faces and favors, where loyalty could be bought and guilt could be rented. No one in her precinct would touch this. The wires reached too close to the mayor's office. If Lena wanted the truth, she would have to be surgical or reckless. She had never been good at the first when the second was available. She made a list of people to see and methods to use: surveillance, quiet interviews, following the money not through banks, but through wire transfers and the shell architecture that disguised intentions. And beneath all of it, like a pulse, there was the image of a young man who had laughed too easily in a photograph and written her name on the back of his own undoing. Weeks of small steps and cold coffee coalesced into a single, dangerous action. Lena had found a link she could follow, an intermediary, a bookkeeper named Sal Romano, who handled payouts for Hale infrastructure and kept meticulous records on paper and in whispered ledgers. Sal was the kind of man who thought logic could be bought with comfortable silence. He liked his privacy and his vinyl booths at diner counters. Lena found him early, hands curled around an omelette like a rosary. He looked older than his years and dirtier than his past. At first, he denied everything: the transferals, the shell companies, the memos. Then Lena slid a photograph across the diner table. Theo, laughing, holding an envelope. Sal's face folded in a way that made Lena think of ripped cloth. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Lena said, leaning in. "But I know people. I can make things loud." Sal's eyes darted to the window, then back. He swallowed. "Theo came to me a month before he vanished," he said. "He wanted copies of a board meeting. He was scared. Said there were names in the minutes that shouldn't be there. Said they were planning a way to launder votes through foundation grants and construction bids." "Names?" Lena asked. Sal nodded. "There was a list. Theo wrote it and asked me to hide it. He said if anything happened to him, find Lena Hart. He told me he felt certain she would see it through because because she wasn't like the others. Sal's hands trembled. I put it where I always put things I want people to find only when they need to. Lena let the moment hang. That phrase, "find Lena Hart," felt like an accusation and a request at once. "Where did you put it?" she whispered. Sal tapped his temple with a greasy finger. "Back at the job. Old site office on East Marlow. They left it empty. I hid the papers in the crawl space under the third floorboard near the rusted beam. But be careful, detective. People are watching." When Lena left the diner, rain had started again, soft and hungry. The East Marlow site looked abandoned, skeleton beams and warnings. Lena moved through it with the practiced grace of a person who had crawled through worse, fingers mapping the floorboards until she found the third plank loose. The envelope she pulled out was yellowed at the edges, the seal broken and resealed. Inside were meeting minutes, invoices, a ledger with neat columns of numbers and names, and a small, folded sheet in Theo's handwriting. Lena unfolded it with care. The minutes recorded a meeting of Hale Infrastructure and representatives of the Corbin Foundation. In the margin, someone had penciled "expedite return donation." The ledger listed transfers to shell accounts, then to donation accounts, then back to contractors. And at the bottom of the ledger, as if Theo had been saving the best for last, a list of names and times, a schedule of meetings where favors were arranged and votes were arranged like dominoes. Thornton, zoning 9/12. Marcus Hale, expedited permit 9/15. Corbin Foundation, meeting 9/19. And at the bottom, a single line, "If anything happens to me, Lena Hart, follow the thread." Lena's phone vibrated in her pocket. "It was June. Find anything?" she asked. "You found the ledger?" June said. Her voice had an edge Lena had not heard before. "Good. Now you have to be careful. They'll come for anything that ties the mayor to this." "They already tried," Lena said. "My name's literally on Theo's contingency list." There was a pause. Then June said, "There's one more thing you need to know. Theo didn't just keep documents. He kept a recording. He recorded one conversation at a foundation gala. He said it would undo them if it ever made it public. He hid the flash drive in a place he trusted. I helped him hide it. I was the last person who saw it." Lena's stomach churned. "Where is it?" June's voice dropped. "I don't know. They took Theo. They took the drive. I think they think it's destroyed." Lena closed her hand around the papers like an oath. "Then we prove they're wrong," she said. The next week was a careful choreography of shadow and light. Lena set up surveillance on Hale's offices and the mayor's foundation. She followed the money through accounts offshore and watched men she'd once arrested for theft now move like chess pieces in suits. Internal affairs did not call. The mayor's office did not call. The city continued to pretend it had no blood on its hands. And then the hits started small at first. A retired cop Lena had used as a source suddenly had an accident. An anonymous tip was called in about Lena's methods. Someone sent a photo of Lena's apartment through a burner phone with the words, "Stop digging or you will be next." Lena kept going. She met June at the old subway platform beneath North Station, where the trains made the air taste like metal. June's crimson coat had been replaced by a dark jacket, but her hands still turned the same way when she was nervous. "They found Sal," June said. "He left his apartment last night and didn't come back. His brother called me. He's gone." Elena's world tightened. People disappeared when they became inconvenient. "Who's pulling the strings?" she asked. June looked at Lena, eyes haunted. "The mayor can't do this alone. He needs cover. He needs people willing to cut bones to fit a story. Thornton has influence in the court. Marcus controls the contracts. Someone controls the press. If Theo had that drive, it'd have their voices on it. They'd all be in trouble." "Then we need the drive," Lena said. June hesitated, then pulled something from her pocket, a small key on a frayed chain. "Theo gave me this," she whispered. "He said it opens a locker at the Transit Archives. He said he put something there he couldn't trust to anyone else. I don't know the locker number, but the mayor's press secretary has been using the Transit Archives sometimes. Their staff key is red." Lena's lungs stuttered. We get the key, we get the locker, we find the drive, we expose them. We try, June said. They moved that night like smoke. The Transit Archive sat behind a door with layers of bureaucracy as warm as a womb. Permissions, sign-ins, surveillance cameras that recorded everything but sleep. Lena had an old contact in the Transit Authority who owed her a favor from a covert raid years ago. He gave them a window 1 hour when the recording room rotated tapes and the guard took his break. The locker was small and smelled like old paper and coffee. Lena's hand closed around the latch of the small metal locker June identified. The key fit. Inside was a battered flash drive and a folded sheet with a single typed sentence. If anything happens to me, Lena Hart, play the file aloud. Lena's hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She slid the drive into her phone and hit play. The recording opened with applause, a gala, something like velvet, glasses clinking, then voices lower, warmer, darker. Theo's laugh at one point, then a man's voice Lena recognized immediately, Mayor Henry Corbin. He was talking with Thornton, laying out favors, the sound of collusion made mundane by casual laughter. The mayor mentioned a contractor by name, named Dates, asked about how to reroute the community investment. It was a clinical unmasking of corruption, with the mayor's voice often punctuating the sentences with jokes meant to soften the blows. Then a piece that made Lena's blood go cold, a voice she knew from national news broadcasts, a local anchor who had endorsed the mayor the previous election saying, "We'll run it as investigative reporting after the permit clears. No one needs to know the origin." Another voice, huskier, added, "Make sure Theo's loose ends are tied." The sound of chairs scraping against marble, the laughter on the recording had an intimacy that made Lena feel like she was trespassing at a funeral. "You got it," June whispered. Lena's voice was small. "We got it." "What do we do?" June asked. Lena thought of her father, of rules, and the cost of breaking them. She thought of Theo laughing in a photograph, and of Sal Romano and the diner's greasy coffee. She thought of promises she had made to herself when she took a badge, and what it meant to keep them in a city that sold reasons to forget. "We expose it," she said. They moved with purpose. Lena went to a reporter she trusted, one who had been unafraid to print things that made the city's power feel uncomfortable. The reporter listened, hands folded, eyes narrowing not with suspicion, but with hunger. He wanted evidence, corroboration. Lena gave him the ledger, the recording, the minutes. He took them with a reverence that was almost religious. The story broke like glass. The city did what it always did when a scandal made the front page. Gasped, then turned quickly to the logistics of damage control. Henry Corbin's office called a press conference and called for patience. Thornton issued a statement on recusal. Marcus Hale claimed a clerical error and promised cooperation. But the truth has the hair of a dog that won't go away. The mayor's approval ratings collapsed within days. The audit board descended with teeth. Lids that had once been convenient found themselves pried open, and while the machinery of politics tried to grind the scandal into harmless filings and statements, Lena watched its faces fall like cards. Two things happened that Lena did not expect. First, the press, feverish for triumph, buried the story about Theo's disappearance under the sediment of political resignations and legal wrangling. People paid attention to the mayor, not to the young man who had been the hinge of the whole apparatus. Second, someone closer to the scandal began to panic. June called Lena, voice raw. They found a body. She said, "Theo," Lena felt the world tilt. They found him in an industrial lot outside the city, wrapped in plastic and tied with twine, a cheap wedding band still on his finger. The medical examiner's call was clinical, the language clean, blunt force trauma, signs of restraint. Lena stood in the morgue, light humming over Theo's closed eyes, feeling the distance between the man in the picture and the dead body. She thought of the ledger, the recording, and of all the people who had smiled in the video as if sealing confessions with good manners. The mayor resigned within a week. Thornton's retirement was announced. Marcus Hale's offices were raided, but as the men fell like dominoes in public view, Lena struggled with a deeper truth. Scandal makes for headlines. Justice requires more than headlines. She still had the ledger. She had the recording. She wanted to hand them to the prosecutor and watch as indictments multiplied and guilty men faced trial. Instead, she watched as the prosecutor's office negotiated deals, pleased to spare reputations to avoid the cost of trials. People who had pulled threads found offers that required quiet signatures and non-disclosure agreements. The city wanted quick fixes so business could continue. What's justice? Lena asked June one night, when the newspapers had been read and the city had started to get hungry for the next outrage. Is it resignations and promises, or is it people held accountable enough that they can't buy silence ever again? June was quiet. I don't know, but maybe it's the small things. The ledger got out, the recording got out, it cost them, that's something. Lena looked at the photograph in her pocket of Theo with a grin that had once been used to charm donors and acquaintances. She thought of the list he'd made and the reason he'd written her name. He had wanted someone who would follow the thread to the end. Maybe she had. Maybe the end wasn't theatrical. Maybe it was a ledger in a press room, a jury room, a quiet courtroom where witnesses stopped being afraid. There was, however, one more thread left to pull. The back of Theo's ledger had a scribble Lena had not seen before. June trust no one. The red coat is not always red. Lena looked at the woman who had given her the case, at the scar on her jaw, at the way she'd lingered when the cameras were on. Why did you help him? Lena asked. June's face hardened, not in guilt, but in resolve. Because I used to believe what I saw could be fixed by getting involved. Then I learned the cost. I helped Theo because he was someone who thought he could change things from the inside. I couldn't walk away. You said to beware the mayor's foundation. You said you left when they started killing. You told the truth and you risked everything. June laughed, a sound like someone who had swallowed a coin. Truth is a compass that points to where people bury their sins. I never trusted it to lead me home, but I knew where Theo hid things. I knew where to look. I also know this. There are people who will try to rewrite violence as consequence. They'll call it a scandal, a misunderstanding. They'll try to paper over a cold body with a policy change. Lena thought of the files and the recording and of the prosecutor's offers. So what now? She asked. June's eyes warmed. Now you make sure Theo's name isn't the end of the story. You make sure the people who profited are held where everyone can see them. People will try to forget. That's the city's favorite pastime. You don't let them. Lena pocketed the photograph and the ledger. She had started the case as one detective following a missing man. She had found a network, a scandal, a body, and a city willing to move the furniture around the corpse to keep the dust off their shoes. Justice would be messy. Justice would be compromised. But justice procedural, loud, agonizing would be the thing that kept honest men honest and powerful men accountable. She walked out of the meeting with June into the late afternoon where the sky had finally cleared. The red coat had been shed, but the color lingered in their minds like warning beacons. Lena had the ledger, the drive, and the stubbornness to see it through. Theo's list still lay on her table at home. Her name on it was both a promise and a burden. Months later, when trials started and pleas were made, Lena sat in the back of the courtroom and watched men who had seemed untouchable for so long answer questions under oath. The camera lights were unkind, but they revealed what needed revealing. June was there too, in the crowd, watching with the expression of someone who had stepped out of a life that no longer fit. When the judge read the verdict that sent at least one of them to prison, Lena felt a small relief, like a pressure finally released. Justice, she had learned, was not a single act. It was a series of small resistances, a ledger pulled from under floorboards, a recording played aloud, a reporter who refused to bury a story. It was Theo Vance who had made a list and then became part of one. It was Sal Romano whose ledger had led the way. It was June who'd returned to risk what she could no longer live with. As Lena walked home that night, the city smelled of rain and hot asphalt and the faint, stubborn scent of beginning again. She had done what Theo had believed she would. She had followed the Marlow thread until it unraveled a little of the city's stain. It had cost people their reputations, their jobs, their sleep. It had also cost a young man his life. Lena stopped on 12th and Marlow and looked down the alley where she had first met June. The light hummed the same song as before. The photograph of Theo had been placed into an evidence envelope at some point during the trial. Lena took it out of her pocket and smoothed it with the same care she'd use on a faded map. To the ones who make lists, she whispered, as if letting secrets be heard by the night. May someone always read them. She folded the picture and placed it gently into the hollow of a manhole cover near the alley, not to hide it, but to give it a place where the city's rain could wash the paper clean. It was a small, imperfect ritual, one detective's way to honor a truth that had cost too much. When she stepped away, the street seemed less like a web and more like a path. She knew the city would keep making its bargains. She also knew that there would be more lists made in the future, and perhaps someone like her to follow them. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.